Hey guys, this is John. I'm playing the Gist in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Let's open with e4 against the Gist, and they instantly play e6, the French defense. Okay, so I've had a few French battles of late. From the white side, let's do this, and I'll play the Tarrasch Variation, knight d2. This player has a peak 15-minute rating of 2038. Knight f6 is one of the main moves. Let's play e5. Then I'll play bishop d3. Usually they play for c5. And after knight c6, I think it's best for white to play knight e2, so this knight can come to f3. Okay, so black plays bishop e7. This is a bit of a slower move. Certainly it's possible, but I'll just take this opportunity to castle. Black plays a6. So I wonder if I should play f4 and further support the center, or just play knight f3. To me, f4 seems like a desirable move, and then playing knight f3 behind. That lends more support to e5, but I wonder if f4, let's say c takes d4, c takes d4, queen b6 is an issue. Probably not. I think knight f3 just covers everything. There's no sacrifice on e5 I really have to worry about. I think that means full speed ahead for this move. Okay, and black takes on d4 pretty quick. Normally in this line, black plays to undermine the center quicker, with f6 on move 7 instead of bishop e7. I also had a game recently in the 5-minute pool where my opponent played queen b6 on this particular move. But I believe f6 is the way to go. Okay, now the Gist is beginning to think a little bit. I would expect either castles or maybe b5. But I think in either case, knight f3 is a natural continuation for white. And it is a big help having this pawn on f4 instead of f2. In the future, I can look to push f5. All right, g6. This is a clear sign that black's opening strategy maybe has not worked out, because this does slow down f5, but as far as their ability to play f6 in the future, they're not in the type of situation they want to be. If they play f6 going forward and I take, they would have to take back with a piece, and e6 will become weak, and I'll have a real stranglehold on e5, perhaps most importantly. So let's just continue with this move. I'll most likely play bishop e3 next to complete my minor piece development. I might look to go g4, knight g3, and f5 if I want to play on the kingside. b5 was played. I'm not concerned about black's queenside aggression. There's not a whole lot for them to achieve on this wing. I could try to play a3 to stop knight b4, but I feel like if black was going to play knight b4, they would have done it already. Bishop e3 looks entirely natural. This also prepares rook c1, attacking the knight on c6. I thought for a brief moment about playing g4, but since black has not castled yet, I think that might be premature. Maybe g4, h5 could be played. Although even in that case, pawn takes, rook takes, knight g3 is probably good for white. Okay, knight b6 was played. Now knight c4 is a little pesky, so I am looking at playing b3 to try to take away that option. Yeah, I think this is decent. And again, if knight b4, I'll probably just play the bishop back to b1. I believe sooner or later black's going to have to commit their king and castle. After which I might launch that pawn storm. g4, knight g3, and f5. I don't see too many ways that black can continue playing on the queen side. They could try knight b4 or something like bishop b7. Okay, bishop to a3. That controls the c1 square. So maybe they're going to try to follow with knight b4 now. But it looks weak. They're taking another piece away from around their king and on the king side. This whole operation appears superficial to me. I don't believe in black's setup. I'm even looking at some direct stuff like f5 already, but there's many moves that can be considered. There's no threat associated with this move other than knight b4. I think they're trying to go knight b4 so that if bishop b1, they have bishop b2, trapping my rook. But let's say hypothetically black does play knight b4 next. I don't have to move this light square bishop. I could just let black take that. That said, it might be worth addressing this. I'm thinking about bishop c1, which would trade my dark square bishop. I don't think this piece is so great for me, although if I do play f5 in the future, this bishop could become good. So bishop c1 is a move I'm pondering. It is a backward move, ultimately. What if I play g4, knight b4, knight g3, knight takes d3, queen takes d3. I'm almost totally mobilized there. And f5 is coming very quickly. What about g4, h5? Probably pawn takes pawn, as I was saying before. Rook takes h5, knight g3. If something like rook h3, I think knight g5 is coming pretty quick. It does somehow feel still that g4 is premature. g4, h5. Could also just play h3 and stabilize the structure there. But pawn takes pawn, rook takes h5, knight g3 is a more direct way forward. Decisions. Maybe g4, h5, h3 is not bad. Is that really so terrible? I don't think so. I'm going to play g4. Once again, I don't think black's queenside demonstration is going to concern me much. So I can shift my focus over to the king side. If h5, I have at least two decent ideas. h3 or taking followed by knight g3. I think both of these approaches deserve attention. Hope you guys are having a good start to your week. I'm playing this game very early in the morning for me. And I'm just kind of experimenting with my schedule a little bit. I'm usually not a morning person, but I'm going to try to record some videos early when I wake up and see if that affects my performance at all. And it would be nice to get a win against the Gist to start out that new schedule. I think h5 is the only move I'm really concerned about here. So I'm going to spend my time right now while he's thinking to decide what to do. Right now I'm leaning towards h3. One reason that might put me over the edge in favor of h3 is, let's say that's played and we get a trade on g4. I have this plan of going king g2 and then rook h1 and trying to take over the file. And if black leaves their king in the center, which it sort of looks like they're going to do, then that might be a good way to take over the file. One line that has crossed my mind is, if h5, h3, h takes g4, h takes g4, what if rook h4? This loses the exchange, knight takes h4, but after queen takes h4, the g-pawn is under attack and it's slightly awkward to defend. I would have to move this knight to do it so my queen could communicate with the pawn. But where do I move the knight? I guess, yeah, because if I play knight c3, then there's queen g3 check. At the very least, black has a perpetual, but probably more because my bishop would even be hanging on e3. So I think if h5, h3, h takes g4, h takes g4, rook h4, knight takes h4, queen takes h4, I would probably have to do something like g5 maybe. And I'd be up in exchange, but my king would be kind of open. But instead, black plays this move, and this is the move that was not bothering me whatsoever. Yeah, I really think just knight g3 is good now, so I'm going to play that right away. Now I would expect black to take my light square bishop, because if they don't, I might play bishop e2 if I truly want to save it. Black's burning a lot of tempi on these queenside moves, but it's really unclear what they're getting out of this because, I mean, it took a couple moves to go take my light square bishop. This bishop came into a3 after initially developing to e7. There's still a huge question mark around black's king, and it looks to me like I'm just gearing up for f5. Okay, rook a7, maybe hoping to assist in defending along the 7th rank, but f5 is crying out to be played now. I will probably do it. I could try to build up to this move, but I already have my queen and my knight pointed at the f5 square. This rook is standing on f1 if it needs to assist. Maybe after f5 I can look to play knight g5. This move just feels so natural. I think it's a little too early to say where this rook should go. It can't go to c1 anyways. On e1, it may not be effective. My best plan later might be like double rooks on the f-file. The only other move here I'd really put any stock in is something like king h1, but I don't think I need to hide my king. Yeah, I think my king can stay out on the g file. It doesn't have to slink away to h1 quite yet, if at all. So we're going to go ahead and play f5. This player is active in a lot of rating categories or time control categories on ICC. They're active in Blitz, Standard, 5-minute, 15-minute. They play a lot of games. Okay, rook c7. What does that do? You can't infiltrate anywhere down the c file, so I'm wondering why they would play that. So they leave the pawn tension alone. This makes me want to play something like f takes g6 and then try to open the f file. If I take on e6, they can take with a bishop. Maybe that helps shore up some key squares. So of these two pawns, I think I'd rather take on g6 if push came to shove. I could also play knight g5 straight away, or even a move like bishop g5 or bishop h6. Those are candidate moves as well. I'm definitely leaning towards f takes g6, though. Yeah, let's play that one. So we're going to leave this bishop where it's at on c8, make sure it can't take on e6. Black takes with the h-pawn. So knight g5 was the move I was most liking here. Attacking f7. And then ideas like knight takes f7, rook takes f7, queen takes g6 are in the air. I could also play slower and play something like rook f2. How does knight g5, rook h4 work out? And I could just play h3 if I wanted. If the bishop ever comes back to e7, I can take f7. So that's no good. Yeah, let's go knight g5. We're coming in with the knight, putting pressure here. Possibly looking to double on the f-file and create new threats. Black could play bishop b2 followed by rook c3, but that's not doing much. I can move my queen and the bishop will be defended. by my queen either on d2 or e2. This knight on b6 is out of play. It doesn't have a role in this position. It can't go to c4. Going back to d7 is not an option. So I think these two minor pieces are black's worst pieces. It seems to me that black has to try something active here in an effort to gain counterplay, but I just don't know what that is. I mean, I mentioned rook h4. I mentioned bishop b2, trying to use the c3 square, but neither of those looks like it'll amount to anything more than a single move attack that white can just defend and then go about my business of attacking f7. They could play rook f8, trying to defend f7, but then I might play knight h7, attacking the rook and trying to gain access to the f6 square with check. So in that case, this rook may be unable to assist in defending this square. Yeah, allowing this knight to get to f6 would be disastrous for black. Six minutes and 20 seconds for me. The gist will be under 7 minutes soon. I'm just planning out in my head right now what I want to do against various black tries. Like rook h4, I mentioned h3 is probably what I'll play. And then after bishop e7, knight takes f7, hitting the queen is good. Against bishop b2, I'll probably play rook ae1. And then if rook c3, probably queen e2. Or d2, I don't think it matters too much. Actually, d2 is probably stronger because then I'd be attacking the bishop, which is in turn defending the rook on c3. So it looks like we would win material there. Yeah, I don't really see a good move for black. It crossed my mind that maybe black would try to activate this light square bishop somehow, but the window to play something like a5, b4, bishop a6 has long closed. Black doesn't have a rook on the a file anymore, so he's not supporting that. So rook g8 is played. So this does give up control of h7, so I could play knight h7 and try to drop my knight into f6. But knight h7 doesn't come with tempo. I think they played rook g8 because they wanted to address the g pawn if I played knight takes f7, so they're making sure I can't play knight takes followed by queen takes g6. This does seem to give me a nice free hand, though, in the position. I think I'm just going to play rook f2 and get ready to double. I could play knight h7, but I think knight h7, bishop e7 might be okay for black. Even that looks really sketchy, but I don't think I have to pull the trigger on the knight h7 move quite yet. This move, on the other hand, just prepares to bring a remaining piece into the fray. And I know it's going to cause black problems, so we can play it quick and know that it's a good move. Put our opponent under pressure. For black, the position has hardly changed. They have all the problems that they did with the rook on h8. It's one of these moves, rook g8. Had he known what I was thinking, he probably would not have played it because I wasn't really rating the sacrifice on f7 to be that strong. Perhaps it is, but it would not have been my top move if I had another free move. I probably would have looked at a building up move like this. You know, black could play rook g7, though. Maybe that's how they're intending to defend this pawn. Rook g7. In that case, they're covering the h7 square. I still get a nice build-up on this pawn, but maybe this rook g8, rook g7 defensive plan is not so bad. Instead, the bishop comes back to f8. That's strange. Once again. So I have a second chance to play knight h7 if I want to. Maybe I will take that now, because knight f6 check will be a threat. They can put their bishop on g7 or e7, but I'm ready to double then, and it's quite a bit of pressure. Also, bishop g5 could be on the horizon too. Okay, I think I'm going to seize this opportunity. Yeah, let's play this move. Because if rook af1 instead, rook g7, and I'd have to find a new way to pressure black. But this, on the other hand, creates immediate problems. Now he has to decide whether to put the bishop here or here. The downside of e7 is that it blocks the rook from guarding that pawn. The downside of g7 is that I can play bishop g5 if I want. A lot to figure out for black with only 3 minutes and change remaining. So on bishop e7, I will double. Okay, queen h4 was played, but that just runs into knight f6 check with a fork on the king and the rook. Yeah, not necessary for us to look any further than that. Go take this guy. We lose g4, but of course a rook is worth more than a pawn. So we're happy to make that trade. So here I can bring my knight back out through f6. I like the fact that my knight is occupying the square that one of black's knights starts on. That's kind of nifty. So I could bring the knight back out, but I can also just double. Let's do that. Double up the rooks. And attack f7. b4 was played. Probably they're looking to play the rook into c3. But if I just take on f7, rook into c3, I take f8. That's game over. So let's play that. And black resign. Okay, so I believe black's problem started shortly after bishop e7. Bishop e7 itself is probably fine, but black never got around to undermining my center, and they spent a lot of time on queenside moves that never amounted to anything. a6, b5, knight to b6, bishop a3, knight b4, knight takes d3. All these moves add up, and you can see that I was able to build an attack along the f-file. And I think achieving f4 on move 9 is quite nice. Let's go back and take a look. So this is a French Tarrasch with knight d2. And knight f6 is one of the lines here. c5 is also very popular. Knight f6, e5. Now I bring the bishop to d3. Black undermines the center with c5. And we want to be able to recapture with the pawn on d4 should black take. So that's why I play c3. Knight c6. And I explained this in a previous video, but the reason why white does not play knight gf3 here is that after queen b6, it is awkward for white to defend the d4 pawn. Notice that I can't play knight b3 to add support here because of c4, forking the two minor pieces. So white would be obliged to gambit a pawn with castles, c takes d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, which is playable for white, but it's not my cup of tea. So I prefer the more positional treatment of this line with knight e2, whereupon white is leaving open the f3 square for the other knight to go to if necessary. So the line I'm most familiar with here, I think I might have stated this wrong actually towards the beginning of the video, is c takes d4, c takes d4, and then f6. This is the line that I've most often seen from this position, where black wastes no time in trying to undermine the center. They immediately attack this. And usually white takes on f6, and after knight takes f6, knight f3, we go from there. There's quite a bit of theory from that position, I must say. And there's alternatives too. Like one interesting alternative here for white is knight f4. This is a more tactical line where white prepares queen h5 check, but they do allow knight takes d4. And then I believe it goes check, king e7, knight g6, pawn takes, and then white inserts a capture on f6. Knight takes, queen takes h8, king f7, and the position is still heavy in theory. And in fact, I had a game in the Blitz category once here from the black side, believe it or not. I just randomly played the French one day and I got into this line. And I think the theoretical verdict is that this line is roughly equal. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. This didn't happen in the game, but it gets back to my point that I think black has to take some quick measures to undermine the center. It's dangerous to allow white to hang around with these strong pawns in the middle, as you saw in the game. So bishop e7 was played. I castled. Black played a6. A lot of times in Frenches, this a6 move is played to support b5, but I'm somewhat skeptical of it here. Again, because it doesn't impede some of my grander plans on the king side involving f4. I think if you're going to play a6, you can't just do it like lazily just because you know it's something that is done in the French. I think it should more be either you have a specific purpose for doing it, like a6 and b5 will be useful to you in the short term, or you just know that theory approves of that move. I mean, you could argue that's also lazy, but if you know you're on solid theoretical ground with a move like a6, then probably players before you have determined that that move is helpful. But I somehow don't get the sense here that black was in their book anymore. Although they did play a6 very quickly. They spent 1 second on that move. But I just played the natural f4 and suddenly black started thinking. Okay, so they inserted that capture and then played g6. And I mentioned that this was a clear sign that black's opening was already backfiring a bit on them. G6 does slow down f5, but it creates some weaknesses on the king side, in particular like this h6 square, and also f6 is weakened. I think I can be pretty happy with what I've achieved so far with the white pieces. And they get the knight to f3. There's a big difference between this position and the position with the pawn back on f2. It helps my attacking chances a lot to have this pawn forward. Black played b5. I just brought the bishop out to e3. I was already starting to think about things on the king side like g4 and f5 to come, but it seemed premature to do that. I think bishop e3 is a decent developing move. I saw the engine for a second wanted to play bishop d2. It's not clear to me that d2 is any better than e3. Queen e1 is also interesting, as the computer was pointing out. Again, I'm not sure if I want to commit to that quite yet. So just bishop e3, and now black played knight b6. And since knight c4 is somewhat of a threat, attacking the dark square bishop, I decided that this was a good time to play b3 and just rule out that option. And this might be black's last chance to castle. Perhaps they had maybe one or two other moves where they could have tried to castle short, but this looks like a good moment to do it if they're going to do it. So castle short, but they might have been hesitant because g4 could be played, and I have a similar plan to the game. Knight g3 and go for f5. Maybe my bishop will make an appearance on h6 soon. I would much rather be white here. So if this were played, f5, yeah, black can try to strike back in the center. I take en passant. Bishop takes f6. And again, you can see the presence of the pawn on f4 helps white because e5 is on lockdown. A lot of times in this Tarrasch line, black hopes to get in e5. They want to achieve that pawn break and open up their light square bishop, get rid of their backward pawn, but it'll be nearly impossible with the current pawn structure. So I think black is suffering here. But still, they probably should castle because they're taking significant risks by leaving their king in the center. Yeah, I think bishop a3 is just too abstract. There has to be a much more specific idea connected to this move to make it any good. Like knight b4 is not enough. So again, I think what they're hoping to do is play knight b4, attack my bishop, get the bishop to retreat to b1, and then play bishop b2, trapping this rook in the corner. Here I spent a little time thinking because, I kind of sensed that bishop a3 was wrong, but it's not like a double question mark move. I would give this maybe like a dubious symbol, like question mark, exclamation point. I do have a lot of candidate moves in reply. Bishop c1, as the computer is saying, is a move I thought about, but I thought black might respond with something like queen e7. And I didn't really want to go backwards either, especially when it felt unprompted. So I played g4, but h5 must be the critical move, huh? The engine likes it. Black might have been hesitant to play on the side of the board where I'm attacking, but a lot of times when this g-pawn is pushed, h5 is the answer. And when I say a lot of times, I mean specific to this pawn structure, and black having pawns e6, f7, and g6. So if h5 was played, I was considering two options, either taking or playing h3. I think g5, as the engine is pointing out, is a typical move that an engine will like, but a human playing white will not like. Because if I play g5, I do gain some space, and I secure my king. Like the h-file will be closed, but where's my attack? Where's it gone? Because now playing f5 will always entail a pawn sacrifice. So by playing g5, I'm just allowing black to close down the wing where I'm trying to open lines. So this is Stockfish 7 I have analyzing this position, and even it suggests g5. That's very interesting to me. I feel g5 is a mistake. I would not play that move in this position. Yeah, I probably would have played h3. I wonder what it thinks about that move. Because I thought that even though the h-file becomes open, if I have king g2 with the idea of rook h1 trying to wrest control of the h-file away from black, then I like my play. I mentioned this kind of wacky line I was looking at, rook h4, sacking the exchange but trying to get the queen in. And now the point is I can't move this knight because if I do, there's queen g3 check. But it looks like I can even give up this pawn, right, and do this, offer a queen trade, and white is much better. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure I would have played h3 against h5, and I dislike the computer suggestion of g5. G takes h5 might be okay too, but I think this also may make it difficult for me to achieve f5 if something like this happened. Probably black has to try h5, though. I think there's no other good way to try to oppose me on the king side. And if I get one more move, knight g3, then I'll be covering h5, and also f5 is on the horizon. So black played this knight b4 move. Yep, knight g3, and the eval is rising in white's favor. Black took the bishop. So it would have been nice to keep my light square bishop, but this was a time-consuming operation for black, and I used that time to set up the f5 break, which is now coming. Rook a7 was played, trying to defend. I think black was anticipating that f7 is going to become weak very soon. So if they castle now, it's probably just too late after f5. I have everything going in my favor, and my minor pieces make a great impression. f6 could be played, bishop h6 could be played. I could just maintain the tension. This is really bad. White has a absolutely free attack. Black has nothing on the queen side. So I think at this point, Black's bed has been made. And they have to keep their king in the center and try to ride this out, but it's not looking good. So rook a7, f5 is way too natural. I probably spent too long on that move. I think I was talking and mentioning that I could try to build up the position, but there was not any doubt that I was going to play f5, so I probably should have just played it. Now rook c7. So for black to take a couple times is not enough. I mean, more lines are just going to get opened if they do this. Bishop takes f5, queen takes f5. Yes, my king becomes temporarily open, but I can always just sidestep to h1. Whereas for black, it's not so simple. So black's king is completely open to the elements there. So rook c7 was played, and I think that distinction I made in the game between taking on e6 versus taking on g6 is important. Because if I take on e6, once again, there's this bishop takes e6 move, and black's bishop is better on e6 than it was on c8. At least it's performing a defensive function here. On c8, it wasn't doing anything. So if I'm going to take a pawn, the g6 pawn is the one to take. There might be arguments for other moves, but this is the most direct, and I think with knight g5 coming next, white's play unfolds naturally. Note that a move like f6, on the other hand, is not appetizing because, again, this closes down the position. That's like g5 earlier, the engine suggestion. So I took, black took the h-pawn. Taking with the f-pawn would probably be met by the same thing, knight g5. Note that h6 cannot be played because of queen takes g6. Yeah, and I might just double up on the f-file again. Or sacrifice on h7 and try to get into g6, perhaps. So h6, g5, and now knight g5. And the gist was up about 3 minutes at this point, but they spent a lot of time on their next move. And they were almost at 5 minutes. So they played rook g8 eventually. The position just seems to be lost, though. I'd be very surprised if black can resist here. White has the attack and much better pieces as well. If these pieces were closer to the action, and maybe we can even include the dark square bishop in that, then black has a fighting chance, but as it stands, they're kind of sitting uselessly on the queen side. And I've just got this very simple idea of doubling up. Rook f2, rook af1, or I could also go to f3 with the rook. If bishop e7, we take f7 with the fork. That just hurts black. So I really don't know what they do. If they move the f-pawn, we can take on f6. Or play queen takes g6 if allowed. I mentioned some active possibilities like rook h4. I was probably just going to play h3 against that. Yeah, the fact that rook h8 was the engine's top move here for a second shows you how helpless black is. The engine says after the simple move h3 that black should just go back with the rook and just wait. Wait for white to build up. Because there's almost nothing else. I think I also mentioned bishop b2, attacking the rook and maybe trying to use the c3 square. But that doesn't seem to do anything. I was just going to play this move. Rook ab1 might also be good, but this seems nice. And if rook c3, queen d2, and loose pieces here and here, black's threats are not substantial enough. So eventually black played rook g8, and I just played rook f2. After the fact, I thought maybe knight h7 should have been played, but I felt like doubling was simple and good. And given the amount of time black had spent on rook g8, it was clear they didn't like their position and were struggling to find a defense. So if you can just whip off a move that only strengthens your position and doesn't change anything else, that's a pretty nice strategy when time is of the essence for your opponent. So black dropped the bishop back to f8. Yeah, again, I mean, I can sympathize with black's plight here. Probably they should have tried that rook g7 move, though, which at least covers h7. And then rook af1. What to do now? I might be ready to crash through on f7, actually. Let's just take the engine's top move, bishop b4. I wonder if I'm ready to sack here. Let's say rook takes f7, take, and now queen takes g6, threatening the rook. Queen e7. And I was thinking that this knight could be brought in now. Yeah, and there's also bishop g5 ideas as well. Looks like black's just getting killed here. Black can barely move. Plus 10. But probably rook g7 would have been a little more challenging to white. As played, bishop f8 didn't accomplish anything. Yeah, I could just double up here, but I figured if I doubled up, then they would be virtually forced to play rook g7. Ah, that's interesting. The engine wants to go bishop d2 now. Is that just to highlight that black has nothing to do? Like take away some squares, like the b4 square? Maybe play bishop a5 someday? That's kind of subtle. I'm pretty sure I would never have found that. I kind of like knight h7 even more, though, because that presents an immediate problem on f6. Yeah, bishop e7, I was just thinking double up. And now if rook g7, yeah, again, this sacrifice is looking good. Take, queen takes. Pinned rook. Too much. So black played queen h4, but that ran into knight f6 check with the fork. And soon black resigned. Okay, I think a pretty smooth game from our perspective. Much of my play was based on how black handled the opening. I think once they played a couple non-critical moves, bishop e7 and then a6, I believe I can get away with this idea of playing f4 and establishing a very strong pawn center and using that f-pawn, that advanced f-pawn, to spearhead my attack and eventually prepare f5. Black did have some chances to resist. They should have castled earlier, but after they passed up castling, I think it's imperative for them to play h5 after g4 to try to fight back on the king side. Because, as I was describing, the queen side play never led anywhere for black. And after a certain point, like after the trade on d3, it's almost like they just admitted that they had nothing and were just going to try to turtle up and defend on the king side. But by that point, my attack was already far along. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this game. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.